Moving into a new home is supposed to be an exciting and refreshing chapter in one's life. After years of hard work, meticulous financial planning, and unwavering discipline, I finally achieved my dream, homeownership. The house I purchased was nothing short of perfection, a modern yet cozy residence nestled in a picturesque neighborhood. The community was well maintained, the lawns were lush and green, and everything appeared to be in order. I envisioned peaceful mornings with coffee on my porch and quiet evenings enjoying the serenity of my new environment. Little did I know, my excitement was about to be tested in ways I never imagined. While the neighborhood was advertised as quiet, I quickly learned that quiet didn't necessarily mean peaceful. Unbeknownst to me, residing right across the street was a woman who would soon become my greatest adversary, Karen. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the Homeowners Association, HOA, an enforcer of arbitrary rules, and a woman who seemed to thrive on controlling others. From the moment I arrived, she made it her mission to remind me that she ruled this community with an iron fist. The fresh start I had envisioned was about to turn into a battle I never signed up for. Barely a day into my new home, before I could even fully unpack, I received my first official welcome from the neighborhood in the form of a violation notice. A crisp white envelope, stamped with the dreaded words HOA Violation Notice, was taped to my front door. Confused and a bit concerned, I ripped open the letter and read its contents. Dear resident, it has come to our attention that your residence is in violation of several community guidelines. Please remove all non-conforming furniture from your front porch and ensure all visible belongings meet aesthetic standards. Failure to comply will result in further action. Sincerely, the HOA Board. I frowned as I read the letter again, trying to make sense of what I had done wrong. My porch had exactly one chair, a modern, minimalistic outdoor seat that matched the house perfectly. There were no garden gnomes, no excessive decorations, no clutter, just a single, stylish chair. I stepped outside and scanned my surroundings. Nothing seemed out of place. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed her, Karen, standing across the street, arms crossed, watching me intently. She didn't even pretend to be subtle about it. She had likely placed that notice on my door herself. I waved, hoping to establish a friendly relationship despite the awkward introduction. "Good morning, neighbor," I greeted, forcing a smile. Karen didn't return the gesture. Instead, she marched directly toward my driveway, her expression as stiff as her posture. "You need to remove that chair," she snapped, pointing at it as if it were some heinous crime against the neighborhood's aesthetic integrity. I blinked, glancing between her and the chair. "Excuse me," she huffed dramatically, tilting her nose upward. "It doesn't match community standards." I crossed my arms, not willing to back down so easily. "Karen, it's literally just a chair." "It's not approved," she emphasized, as though that alone justified her complaint. Then, in an even more condescending tone, she added, "And neither is your house, actually." I raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." She smirked, clearly reveling in her self-importance. "We weren't informed of a new tenant. Did the previous owner get this purchase approved by the board?" That's when it hit me. Karen assumed I was a renter. She believed I was some transient resident who had no real stake in the community, a mere outsider who needed her approval to exist in her neighborhood. I decided to play along. "I don't think the owner needed to check in with you." Her smug smile widened, like she had just won a victory she had been waiting for. "Oh, but they do. We have strict policies about who can live here. If the homeowner didn't get this approved, then I'm afraid I'll have to start the eviction process." I let out a small laugh, unable to believe the absurdity of the situation. "Eviction?" "Yes," she said, her voice dripping with self-satisfaction. "We don't allow renters to disturb our community harmony." That's when I decided to drop the bombshell. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my house keys, and twirled them around my finger. "That's great to hear, Karen, because I'm not a renter, I'm the new owner." Her entire expression collapsed. The confidence, the superiority, it all disappeared in an instant. You bought this house?" she asked, her voice cracking. I grinned. "Yep. Paid in full. Signed, sealed, delivered." Karen opened her mouth, then shut it again. She looked genuinely horrified, as if she had just realized that she had no power over me. Then, as if she hadn't just threatened to kick me out of my own home, she plastered on the fakest smile I had ever seen. "Well," she said, her voice suddenly sugary sweet, "welcome to the neighborhood. I'm the president of the HOA, so if you need anything, you can come to me." I nodded. Good to know. Then I turned and shut my door in her face. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next few days, I started receiving more and more violation notices. First, it was my porch light. Apparently, it was too bright. Then, it was my trash bins. They were too visible from the street. Next, it was my own driveway. Karen had decided that my car was parked in a way that didn't comply with neighborhood standards. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was happening. Karen couldn't evict me, so she was trying to make my life a living nightmare. She was determined to bury me in so many HOA violations that I'd either cave in or sell the house just to escape her wrath. What Karen didn't know, however, was that I had a secret. I didn't just own this house. I owned several houses. In fact, I owned nearly a third of the entire neighborhood. And Karen, she was about to learn just how much power I really had. The morning after receiving my latest violation notice, I woke up to yet another letter taped to my door. But this one was different. It wasn't just a warning, it was a formal complaint demanding an immediate hearing before the HOA board. The accusation: my front yard was neglected and out of compliance with neighborhood standards. I had moved in less than a week ago. My lawn was perfectly manicured. This was pure harassment. As I stared at the paper, Mark, my next-door neighbor, walked over, coffee in hand, grinning like he was watching a reality TV drama unfold in real life. "You really pissed off Queen Karen," he chuckled, nodding at the letter in my hand. "She's been running around all morning talking to the other board members. She's out for blood." I sighed. I figured as much. She tried to evict me before realizing I actually own the house. Now she's just doubling down. Mark sipped his coffee. "Oh, it gets better. She doesn't know you own more than just this place, does she?" I smirked. "Not yet." And with that, I headed straight to the HOA office, fully prepared for the war Karen had just declared. Karen's silence was not a retreat, it was a recalibration. The neighborhood remained quiet for a few days, with no more violation notices or passive-aggressive messages. But the absence of conflict felt suspicious. Mark, my next-door neighbor, jokingly suggested she might be constructing a secret bunker to plot my downfall. We laughed, but deep down, I knew he wasn't entirely wrong. Karen was planning something. And then, it happened. A letter from the HOA arrived in my mailbox. But this wasn't another petty violation notice. This was an eviction notice, signed by the board, demanding I vacate my home due to persistent community disruptions and failure to comply with homeowner standards. I laughed out loud as I read it. The absurdity of Karen's tactics had reached new heights. She had truly gone nuclear. When Mark saw the letter, he shook his head in disbelief. "No way. She actually did it." "Oh, she did it," I said, holding up the paper. "She went full dictator." Mark took the letter from my hand and read it over. "Dude, she doesn't even have the power to evict you. The HOA doesn't own the property. They can fine you, harass you, but they can't kick you out." I grinned. She's about to find that out the hard way. Instead of reacting immediately, I waited. I wanted Karen to believe she had won. And sure enough, the next morning, she was glowing, smiling and waving to neighbors, probably patting herself on the back for restoring order to her perfect community. But she had no idea what was coming next. It was time to let Karen know exactly who she was messing with. I called for an emergency HOA meeting, not as a resident under attack, but as a property owner with substantial influence. When I arrived, Karen was already seated, looking smug beyond belief. She barely contained her glee as she greeted me. "I'm surprised you even showed up. We assumed you'd be packing by now," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. I calmly set a stack of legal documents on the table and leaned forward. "Actually, Karen, I came to discuss something important, the future of this community." Karen scoffed. "There's nothing to discuss. The board already made their decision. You have 30 days to vacate." I chuckled. "Yeah, about that. You see, You don't have the authority to evict me. In fact, the eviction notice you sent? It's completely fraudulent. You didn't file it properly, it wasn't reviewed legally, and you bypassed the actual process entirely. I slid a document across the table. This is from my lawyer. Consider this a formal cease and desist. If you don't retract your fake eviction immediately, you're looking at a lawsuit. Karen's smug expression faltered for the first time. This is nonsense. Oh, and one more thing. I continued, pulling out another document. I wasn't planning on mentioning this, but since you tried to remove me from my own home, I thought I'd clarify something. You do know I own multiple properties here, right? Karen's jaw clenched. You what? I nodded. That's right. I own 10 houses in this neighborhood. That means I have a significant say in what happens here. In fact, according to the bylaws, because I own more than 10% of the properties in this community, I have voting power that surpasses even yours. The room went completely silent. Karen's face turned a deep shade of red. That's ridiculous. You. Greg, the vice president, cut her off. Karen, is this true? I smiled and pulled out one final document. Actually, I'd like to make a motion. Effective immediately, I propose a vote of no confidence in the current HOA president. Karen's eyes went wide with panic. You can't. Greg cleared his throat. Actually, he can. The vote was held right then and there. One by one, the board members raised their hands, and just like that, Karen was removed from her position as HOA president. Her final act of desperation was to argue, yell, and even threaten legal action, but it was useless. The board was done with her. The neighborhood was done with her. Within a week, a new HOA president was elected, a much more reasonable, sane, and far less Karen-like individual. Karen had ruled through intimidation and control, but in the end, her power was an illusion. When faced with someone who actually knew the rules, she crumbled. And then, the cherry on top, Karen put her house up for sale. Mark sent me a picture of the for sale sign in her yard with a single-word text, victory. Karen's downfall wasn't just about a petty neighborhood feud. It was a lesson in power, knowledge, and standing up for oneself. Too often, people in positions of perceived authority abuse their influence simply because they assume no one will challenge them. But when you understand the rules, when you truly know your rights, you hold the ultimate power. This situation could have played out very differently. Many people might have caved under Karen's pressure, fearing repercussions or simply not wanting to deal with the hassle. But I knew better. I knew that her power was based on intimidation, not legality. By using the very rules she tried to weaponize against me, I turned the tables completely. And that's something everyone should remember. Bullies thrive on ignorance. The best way to fight them is with knowledge. Whether it's an overreaching HOA president, a corrupt boss, or an unreasonable authority figure, knowing your rights can make all the difference. With Karen gone, the neighborhood felt different, lighter, freer. People no longer whispered complaints about unfair fines or arbitrary rules. The new HOA leadership focused on real community improvement rather than personal vendettas. Mark and I celebrated with a backyard barbecue, inviting the very neighbors Karen had spent years tormenting. It was a reminder that communities are built on cooperation, not control. When given a chance, people can come together to create something truly positive. The neighborhood finally felt like home, like the fresh start I had wanted when I first moved in. And as I sat back in my perfectly compliant porch chair, sipping a cold drink, I couldn't help but smile. Karen had tried to rule with an iron fist, but in the end, it wasn't power that won. It was persistence, knowledge, and a well-timed vote of no confidence. And that, my friends, is how you handle a Karen. After Karen's failed attempt at eviction, an eerie silence fell over the neighborhood. The usual influx of violation notices suddenly ceased, and Karen herself seemed to vanish from public view. This abrupt shift was unsettling. Karen was not the type to back down easily. Mark, my ever-curious neighbor, found the quiet unsettling. "You think she's plotting something?" he asked over coffee one morning. I had no doubt. Karen's silence wasn't a surrender, it was a recalibration of her tactics. A few days later, I noticed unusual activity near her house. Groups of board members were seen coming and going, holding hushed conversations on her porch. It was clear that something was brewing. I decided to take a proactive approach. If Karen was planning another move, I needed to be a step ahead. I reached out to my lawyer, asking him to monitor any legal action tied to the HOA. Sure enough, within 48 hours, we uncovered a new strategy. Karen was trying to push through a revision of HOA bylaws, specifically targeting property owners with multiple homes. Her goal was clear: limit my influence within the HOA and force me into compliance. However, she underestimated just how deeply I had embedded myself into the neighborhood's legal framework. Not only did I own multiple properties, but I had also started forming alliances with other homeowners who had grown tired of her reign of terror. As Karen plotted in the shadows, I was setting up my next move, one that would ensure she had no room left to manipulate the system. When the next HOA meeting was announced, I knew this was Karen's last stand. The agenda included a discussion on restructuring voting rights for property owners, a direct attempt to curb my influence. Karen had rallied some of the board members to push the amendment forward, hoping to tilt the balance back in her favor. The meeting room was packed. Homeowners who had once remained silent about Karen's antics now had a vested interest in seeing her removed. The tension was thick as Karen took the floor. For too long, we have allowed a few individuals to monopolize our community decisions. This amendment ensures that no single owner can overrule the voice of the majority, she declared with practiced authority. I stood up, my documents ready. Karen, while I appreciate your concern for fairness, this amendment is not about equality. It's a targeted move against me for standing up against your overreach. Furthermore, you failed to follow the legal process for amending HOA bylaws. The room buzzed with murmurs. I continued, for an amendment to be valid, it requires a majority vote from homeowners, not just board members. And guess what? I pulled out a stack of signed petitions from homeowners opposing the amendment. 60% of the neighborhood has rejected your proposal before it even reached the ballot. This amendment is dead on arrival. Karen's face twisted in rage. She turned to the board members, but even her closest allies looked hesitant. Greg, the vice president, sighed. Karen, you should have known better. We can't push something through that the majority opposes. Defeated, Karen sat down, her confidence shattered. The room erupted in applause, marking the beginning of the end for her rule. With Karen's final attempt at maintaining power thwarted, I knew it was time to go on the offensive. For too long, she had wielded the HOA as a weapon against homeowners, disregarding the actual rules and regulations meant to protect residents. It was time for her to face the consequences. I filed an official complaint against Karen, citing multiple abuses of power, fraudulent documents, and unlawful attempts to evict me. My lawyer ensured that the case was airtight, leaving no room for her to escape accountability. Additionally, I gathered testimonials from neighbors who had suffered under her rule, stories of fines issued for trivial matters, threats of legal action over minor infractions, and blatant favoritism towards certain residents. The HOA board was forced to take action. Karen was summoned to a hearing, where her actions were scrutinized under legal advisement. Greg, who had long grown tired of Karen's antics, led the charge. Karen, we've received multiple complaints about your leadership. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties as president. Karen exploded in protest. You can't do this. I built this community. But the decision was final. Her power was officially revoked, and she was given a warning: any further misconduct could lead to legal action. Defeated and humiliated, Karen stormed out of the meeting. But I wasn't done yet. With Karen removed from power, it was time to rebuild the HOA into something functional and fair. The remaining board members, now free from Karen's influence, agreed to review and revise many of the draconian rules she had implemented over the years. The first major change: transparency. Homeowners were given full access to meeting minutes, financial statements, and decision-making processes. No more backroom deals or unilateral decisions. I also pushed for an amendment that prevented any single board member from holding too much authority, ensuring that no future Karen could abuse their power. The neighborhood began to heal. People who had once feared speaking up now actively participated in community meetings. The rigid, unreasonable enforcement of HOA rules was replaced with a fair and balanced approach. More importantly, a sense of camaraderie returned to the neighborhood, replacing the tension that had existed under Karen's rule. Mark summed it up best when he said, "Dude, this place actually feels like a neighborhood now, not a dictatorship." Karen didn't take her downfall well. With her influence gone and her reputation in shambles, she made one last desperate attempt to regain control by spreading rumors about me. "He manipulated the board. He's turning this place into a slum," she would rant to anyone who would listen. But the problem for Karen? No one was listening anymore. Homeowners had seen the truth, and they were done with her fear-mongering. Realizing she had lost all support, Karen put her house up for sale. The "for sale" sign in her yard was the ultimate sign of victory. Mark, ever the comedic relief, texted me a photo of it with one word: victory. As Karen moved out, the neighborhood truly felt like it had been freed. People who had lived under her iron fist could now enjoy their homes without fear of arbitrary fines or harassment. The new HOA leadership worked diligently to undo the damage she had done, and within months, the community was thriving. Looking back, I realized this wasn't just a personal victory. It was a testament to the power of standing up against bullies. Knowledge and persistence had turned the tables on Karen, proving that no matter how much power someone thinks they have, the truth and the law will always prevail. As I sat on my porch, sipping coffee in my unsightly chair, I smiled. The war was over, and I had won, not just for myself, but for the entire neighborhood. With her position in the HOA hanging by a thread, Karen made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. She tried rallying support from a few remaining allies within the community, claiming she was the only one who could uphold the neighborhood's prestigious standards. She went door to door, attempting to paint the new homeowner as a troublemaker and a threat to the community's values. But her efforts were in vain. The neighborhood had already seen through her tactics, and her credibility was in ruins. Despite the overwhelming opposition, Karen refused to back down. She filed complaints with local authorities, tried reaching out to legal firms, and even attempted to call an emergency HOA meeting to plead her case. However, the damage had already been done. No one was willing to stand by her anymore. The community had moved on, and she was now seen as nothing more than a nuisance. Following Karen's removal, a new HOA leadership was elected. The new board members were more reasonable, focusing on fair policies that benefited the entire community rather than enforcing arbitrary, self-serving rules. The changes were almost immediate. Residents no longer had to worry about petty violation notices or Karen's intrusive monitoring. The HOA meetings became productive, addressing real community concerns instead of personal vendettas. Under the new leadership, outdated policies were revised, and unnecessary restrictions were lifted. Homeowners were given more freedom while maintaining a harmonious and aesthetically pleasing neighborhood. The shift in power marked the beginning of a new era, one that valued fairness, respect, and genuine community spirit over dictatorship and micromanagement. Realizing she had no more power and was no longer welcome, Karen decided to sell her house and move out of the neighborhood. The very community she once ruled with an iron fist had turned its back on her, making it clear that she was no longer wanted. As soon as the "for sale" sign went up in her yard, it became a moment of quiet celebration for many residents. Mark, the protagonist's supportive neighbor, sent a picture of the sign with a single word in a text message: victory. The neighborhood had finally rid itself of its self-proclaimed queen, and there was a collective sigh of relief. It was the end of an era, one dominated by unnecessary power struggles and fabricated rules. With Karen gone, the community could finally thrive in peace. With Karen out of the picture, the neighborhood began to flourish. The oppressive atmosphere that had lingered under her reign lifted, and residents started feeling a newfound sense of freedom. People became more engaged in community events, and the spirit of unity that had been suppressed for so long was finally restored. The protagonist, now recognized as one of the major property owners, continued to play a role in maintaining a fair and just HOA. He ensured that homeowners' rights were respected, preventing another Karen from ever taking over again. The community became an example of how standing up against power-hungry individuals could lead to positive change. The entire experience served as a powerful lesson, not just for the protagonist, but for everyone in the neighborhood. It proved that knowledge is power, and that understanding one's rights is crucial when dealing with overreaching authority figures. Karen had used intimidation and manipulation to exert control, but in the end, facts, legal awareness, and resilience had won the battle. Standing up to bullies, no matter how influential they seem, is always worth it. The protagonist's journey showed that perseverance and strategy could dismantle even the most tyrannical rule. With the right knowledge and a willingness to fight back, no one has to suffer under the thumb of a Karen. And just like that, the war was over. The neighborhood was free, and a new chapter had begun, one where fairness and respect triumphed over control and fear.